Blessed love and peace. It is 5:30, and not intending to do this joint. Sitting here quiet before Fajr, presumably. It's about maybe 2.5 hours before the day rise. One of the challenges, actually, in the spiritual path at this moment. Wow, I guess we're just going to vent and we're going to unload some things here at this point. There's a specific incident which precipitates this recording. So, like I said, just sitting here, I wake up in the morning. God, thank God. I don't know, but today seems kind of odd. We've done that one before, recently even. Sitting quietly, just meditating, informally, just processing. One of the challenges, to be honest, at the moment, do I seem awake a wee bit? One of the challenges, just in the spiritual path, particularly concerning Fajr, when is Fajr? When do we know? Particularly when the nights are very long. And when talking to kinfolk through the years, Muslim kinfolk, the quick quip is when the birds sing, when the roosters sing. Okay, there are no roosters here, generally speaking, in this immediate vicinity, but there are birds. The birds are on different cycles. Sometimes the birds are very prevalent. The robins are singing way before Fajr, particularly during the summer and spring. And then there are occasions for weeks when the birds are very quiet, particularly during the winter. So it's other than a regular occurrence to set our internal clock by. We can work with the cycle and get attuned with the cycle, but there are a lot of disruptions in that cycle. The traffic right here, AM traffic. The AM traffic is rather regular. Right now it's Sunday, Domingo, so it's a different vibration. However, weekdays, traffic begins around a little bit before 6 a.m., 6 a.m. in the mañana. But obviously, Fajr varies considerably during the year. And that's challenging because when Fajr is before the rush hour traffic and we wake up with the robins, and additionally, it's very peaceful. It's very spiritual. It's very healing to be attuned to that cycle. However, during these times of year, when the day rises later in the day, 8:30 thereabouts, we're getting to that point. It's a little bit before that, but it's maybe around 8:15 thereabouts. I haven't looked at the clock or the schedule specifically recently. But when it's later like that, that means rush hour is before Fajr. That means it's rush hour that's waking us up, and the rush hour that's telling us when the prayer is. That's unhealthy. That's man. That's conjured. That's grind. And it's very difficult to secure our internal clock in that respect. So venting all these other things before getting to the actual incident. One of the difficulties with Juma is abstaining from experiencing salam within the ummah. Salat is sacred and holy. Juma is sacred and holy, and we love this. Praying in congregation, fellowship, sacred and holy. Alhamdulillah. But at the same time, humans are predatory across the board in each religion. And when one walks the word, the truth within any religion, one becomes increasingly pious and less predatory, which means one becomes further vulnerable to the predatoriness, and particularly when one is perceived as a stranger with any particular religiosity, that vulnerability is compounded. And that's one of the challenges with attending Juma. I've shared before about going to Juma and seeing a police officer wearing his standard issue weapon, lethal weapon on his hip whilst performing salat amidst the congregation. That's not salam. And that's not judgmental. That's just, we cannot do that. So that's just one element, one methodology of the predatoriness. The Ummah is extremely intelligent, extremely calculating, for better and for worse. And when one becomes further immersed within Ummah and further dependent within Ummah, one becomes again further veiled to those predatory calculations and otherwise. And in this respect, we're talking about money situations, land situations, business situations, and otherwise. So, well, I'm not going to get into the specifics in that respect at the moment, but that's some of the concerns concerning Juma, and the carefulness, the mindfulness in attending Juma. It's not excuses; it's explanation. Because again, until the collective, and this goes to the shul and teshuva with Yom Kippur, and additionally, until the collective is properly practicing the deen, the mitzvot, the dharma, whatever it is, the truth, emet, sat, then involvement with the congregation, the sangha, the shul, the ummah, church, is precarious. And that's not hate, that's reason, that's rationale, that's explanation, that's guidance, that's encouragement. So anyways, that's some of the side note before even getting onto the main course. Kinfolk asked me also recently, beautiful holy kinfolk also asked me about my path. And within the context of the tradition of Israel, I'm just going to be candid about kashrut and why I may be seen in locations where the kitchen is not kasherized and otherwise. First, say that I'm vegan. I eat plants, all the green plants, the green fruits and vegetables for food, bereshit. That's the mitzvot. That's what we adhere to. Don't eat meat. Don't eat dairy, as a general rule. Now, people say, well, hold up. We saw you eat some sour cream and onion potato chips and had some cheese over there, or had some milk product there, or cookies there. In occasions when I do partake of dairy, actually, at the moment, have some tikka masala at this moment. First, don't eat meat. So if something has like a fish in it, fish sauce or whatever, try to stay as much away as possible from that too. In cases of dairy and cheese, vegan. And on occasion, violation of vegan. And the reason for the violation is for the sake of relationship. There's a very strong reason. Again, understanding the I don't want to get into much of a spiel on this because it's going to sound like twisted pimp talk or whatever else. But for those who have an understanding about like spiritual path and relation and interconnecting the purposefulness within kashrut, and respecting life, and further, there's also the guidance of parents' lineage, honoring our ancestors, and further. So on those occasions when I do, well, two distinct things. One is having dairy, period, even when it's kosher dairy products, because usually that's what it is. It's a kosher dairy product. But then two, eating from kitchens and food preparation that is contaminated through exposure to other types of trife food products. So those are two distinct phenomena. So I initially addressed the situation with dairy. When I have dairy, first it's extremely infrequent. In the past year, it is increasingly frequent amidst conditions, no excuses. Each occasion, the reason for that is strengthening relationship with kinfolk, with people, blood, family, friends. Um, and it is for that reason significantly primarily of partaking of dairy. When it comes to eating from contaminated kitchens, very difficult. However, again, same principle basically is a relation. In those situations, the tendency, and there's not a there's not a hard fast rule about when with this and the other. It's a matter of the occasion. Um, and so, um, in our diplomatic walks, there are occasions of breaking bread with kinfolk in kinfolk's houses, even in restaurants where the kitchen is not kosherized. Um, and again, for the sake of the relationship with the kinfolk in that respect, um, we partake of it. Now, in those particular situations, the tendency is strictly to eat strictly vegan, vegetable um, food, no dairy, no meat, no nothing. Um, and there's recognition of the food being contaminated by interaction with meat and all different types of food. Again, the reason for it is relationship, particularly as relationship is taught through Torah and Halakha. Yeah, it was very quiet, like for the past hour. Now all of a sudden, since I started doing this, now we're getting howls. Um, so again, recognizing the relationship between doing these digital ditties and the the responsive kinfolk spirit around here, and that's what we recognize also, that we're dealing. It's the it's the it's the approach of demons. It's the approach of devil through the kinfolk, through the beings around us. And when we do things that are further agitating, um, that presence of the demonic becomes increasingly prominent. And it manifests within the behavior of kinfolk around. And that's not even necessary. That's not derogatory. That's not disrespectful. That's not dehumanizing. That is recognizing what this is. And it's not even a matter of it's not even quote demonizing the demons. It's just a matter of understanding that's what it is. Everyone is looking for healing, even the demons. So, and we're pieces of shit. We're no better than worse than anybody else. So we walk with the mindfulness of responding it as best as we can with patience and compassion and accuracy, understanding the nature of the suffering and addressing it as much as possible, as much as we can with the energy that we have at the moment. So, and that's what precipitates this joint. Let's keep it brief so that we can continue on with our AM prayer and meditation and Fajr. So that's some of the rationale concerning what is recognized as violation of kosher and it's extremely unusual. Yeah, it's 6 a.m. and kinfolk are like wailing. Usually, that being that loud, usually it's what people refer to as white folk, white young people just yelling. Rah, rah. That's what is going on right now. Um, and that's usually around between midnight and 3 a.m. because black folk don't get loud and tend to be like that, just like wailing like that. It's usually white people who are drunk or high or something like that and feeling like a certain amount of like it doesn't ain't nobody gonna do anything anyways, and so just let it out. Wolf kind of cries. Black folk tend not to do that because black folk try not to bring too much attention. If anything, it's beats, it's bass. That's what it is, and it's just like boom, and maybe yelling amidst the bass, but it's not just wolf yelping as it is at this moment. And it sounds like the voices of African kinfolk. And it's 6 a.m., so it's a little bit late for it to be like a drunken thing. But ain't no telling, particularly on a Sunday. The drunkenness can last all the way through day rise. but it's comparatively unusual. Anyways, so that will be the train horn. There is actually, through the years, a truck, a vehicle that drives around with a device, a horn sound that sounds like a train whistle. Like, that's not what it sounds like, but something like, oh, I can't even, I'm not going to imitate a train whistle, but a very loud train whistle, but it's a truck that drives around. So a number of years ago, it's an indication of like the intentionality behind the sound signals, from the sirens, um, even mufflers and otherwise. The drone, the factory drone, and through the night, particularly in the winters when everything is quiet, you just hear this drone. And right now, it's the train whistle. So some of this is unintentional, but still happening and still a manifestation of stress and malaise, and some of it is actually very intentional. So sometimes it's difficult to discern that line. All right, continuing with this joint. So with kosher, that's our explanation. Now, what we also say to kinfolk, we have yet to be directly. The most kinfolk don't care enough to challenge us about that. Just don't perceive us as being in the fold enough to care. Just like strangers, it doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter what they do. When people actually recognize us as part of the fold, then there's increasing amount of like, so why do you do that? Why do you do this? And some of it is an attempt to be disassociative and to like just like find a reason just to continue to kick the person out. Another one is like, yo, no, you're here and you're gonna be here with us, and we need like, yeah, what's going on with this? Because this is hurt. So that's the reason why we're explaining this. Now, again, it's recognition that we eat from contamination, and we do the best we can in the circumstances that we are involved in. It's beneficial to recognize that we live within very tenuous economic conditions, and things. I mean, I guess I'm addressing this to religious kinfolk who know what it is to live a religious life, to live a pious life to a certain degree, and the challenges of dealing with convention amidst that. So that's what we're in, and to recognize that aside from the 613 mitzvot, we abide by additional precepts and principles, particularly in the practice of peace with other communities, particularly because we are increasingly vulnerable than other kinfolk who simply practice the 613 mitzvot. And that's not a dig, that's not less than or greater than, it's just actuality. So, and one thing we respond to, sometimes people, when being accused of something or when something is being called about them, then they just point out what the other one is doing as a way of drawing attention away from themselves. So that's what this might seem like, but it's actually very much related. And it helps even just cognitively, when dealing with this anticipation of um, interrogation or otherwise. But this is one thought that is occurs when being addressed with the concerns regarding kashrut, particularly from kinfolk here on this continent. Well, can we get off the case? All right. So what we say is this: are you a U.S. citizen? That's trife. That's an abrogation of mitzvot. The U.S. Constitution is an abrogation of mitzvot, and so being a citizen, based upon the political compact of the U.S. Constitution, that is an abrogation of the mitzvot, and that's not just politics. That's serious kavanah. That's serious. That affects teshuvah. That's emet. So, and that also affects our conditions on how much we are able to observe kashrut. And we're not blaming anybody. It's all our doing. But when we're going to understand things in an accurate way, understand that participate. Well, first, again, going to the citizenship. Citizenship is a voluntary, volitional, proactive act. Even when somebody doesn't even vote or does anything else, but is just a citizen, that person is proactively involved in that political compact, and everything that is done through the name of that political compact. So all the military warfare in every place around the world, all the raping, pillaging, and murdering that the United States government is doing and paying for and otherwise sanctioning, every citizen has a hand in that. So for those who are very strict, for those who are very religious and living a very austere life, have to acknowledge that. That's necessary. And we do, and that's why we don't. We distance, we opt out of that citizenship, and we experience the consequences accordingly. We experience the miracles and blessings accordingly too. So for those who are observant, particularly within the tradition of Israel and our citizens, that's a serious challenge. And our purpose is not to antagonize or admonish or otherwise, but particularly for those who want to hold us accountable for being perhaps somewhat lackadaisical in our observance of kashrut and eating, from the very least, from contaminated kitchens and households. Understand that there are multiple types of contamination, and much of our partaking of nourishment from contaminated houses, kitchens, is precipitated by the increased vulnerability, economic vulnerability of our conditions. How do I put that simply? We live in a very modest way with modest earthly means, which means that it takes a lot of doing for the different things that we do. Purchasing food or acquiring food. And additionally, we've done co-ops before, and then the co-ops get shut down. Healthy food itself is very expensive. To get money requires doing dirt, abrogating mitzvot. Eating healthy is very expensive. Organic agriculture is very expensive. So there are fewer opportunities when living a very austere life. And many of those fewer opportunities involve working, relationship, relying upon kinfolk who abstain from keeping kosher. And so that's it. And the reason particularly of addressing the situation concerning citizenship is that the U.S. citizenship is a very significant causal factor of the expense and the limited availability of healthy options. So again, that's particularly why we address that as accordingly. So that should make a connection right there for those who have that literacy. So for that reason, I'm going to get off that at the moment. Address the Ummah, basically. So do I talk about the church? I mean, still, we're going to leave it at that. Well, this is what I'll say. This is one thing we're working on at the moment that's shared with us. There's the Roman Church, and then there's the Apostolic Church. And now those might be terms that are already traditional and already have specific meanings, but this is what we'll share for the moment by what we mean by the Roman Church and the Apostolic Church. The Roman Church basically is established by St. Paul before Rome, before he travels to Rome. It is established when he calls upon Caesar. It is established actually before that, when he shares a doctrine that is embracing towards the Greek, the Hellenic kinfolk amongst the early apostles. It is one that the Gentiles, um, Paul is not the only apostle. Peter has his dream, and further. However, Paul, particularly um, in calling upon Caesar, on deferring to Caesar, um, establishes a very distinct and huge path, road within the Christian faith. Um, and it's a pragmatic road. It's a pragmatic path that is very influential and that is very foundational. The Roman Church itself is determined from that path. But the point is that path is one of accommodation, of um, assimilation within the convention. So it's a different life than the apostolic life. It is one where Paul has his privileges, his Roman privileges, citizenship. He has a livelihood making tents. He can rent his own house, and additionally, and so he is very much of the world. He doesn't live as Jesus does, and that's not a dig on St. Paul. St. Paul has a purpose, and there's a reason for what he does. However, it's recognizing that it is very different than what Jesus does. And it is very influential in what the church does today. It is a different type of practice. It is a different type of religion than what Jesus does, than what Israel is. That's just the facts. And it becomes hugely, obviously, influential. And additionally, it's knowledgeable, but it's different than what the roots are, what the further foundation is, the apostolic. So the apostolic church that we're talking about is just the one that is the livelihood, the lifestyle that Jesus practices, the lifestyle that the apostles practiced, particularly with Jesus and basically after Jesus, as it's known generally within Acts and otherwise. So when referring to the Roman church, there's application that's beyond just the schism between East and West of the empires. It is other than the schism between Orthodox and Coptic and Roman Church, Catholic Church, or whether it is the lifestyle of being attached to the hierarchy of convention, um, plain and simple. And it's different than what Jesus teaches. And the thing is, it's a necessary part of sharing the teachings, but and it's a continual process. It's the same challenge that that confronts Israel generations before Jesus walks the earth. It's that distinction between being a wanderer and walking with God as a wanderer in faith, and then being um, a civilized city person, being an established city state, and having that authority, that power, military, economics, infrastructure, and otherwise. It's a different lifestyle with different challenges, with considerable challenges. Um, so, anyways, just recognizing that's one of the challenges that forever confronts religiosity itself, the Buddha, and otherwise. So, all right, that's that. Now we'll get to the incident um, that precipitates this joint, and then maybe get into prayer meditation. It's 6 a.m. now. So, a few days ago, also, going back to the tradition of Israel, um, we can be accused of not observing a second day for Sukkot, not observing a second day for Rosh Hashanah, not observing a second day for Pesach, not observing a second day for Shavuot. And that's already understood in many contexts that there are people within the tradition of Israel who do that. Most of the people who do that outside of Eretz Israel are less Orthodox. Most of the Orthodox, I think probably actually, one would say every Orthodox, to be Orthodox, involves observing the second day on each of those occasions. So that's understood. It's a difference of interpretation or otherwise, and there might be less of a concern regarding that. But just again, two things on that: how many days is Yom Kippur? We understand the general rationale for the second day being the discernment of the confirmation of the new moon actually occurring. So there's understandability concerning that pragmatics. But again, Moshe Rabbeinu says not to add, and particularly for those who are rather vulnerable, or rather living a very austere life, to have another day of not working is a considerable burden. And when one does not have citizenship and the luxuries that are provided from citizenship, that additional day is an increasing liability. So some people can afford not working another day, and those that citizenship. I don't want to get into pointing fingers things, but it's another. Being without citizenship can help kinfolk recognize what we're talking about. And we're not admonishing in return. We're just acknowledging what the conditions are. So one, not to add to the mitzvot. To add another day is considerably burdensome. That burden might be lessened, is lessened when one has the luxuries of citizenship, but that's comparatively a side note. Going back to the causal factor, as we understand, of why the second day is practiced amidst orthodoxy outside of Eretz Israel, again, goes to the new moon, the confirmation of the new moon, and communication, at least traditionally. Today is less applicable. There are ways of discerning this. However, traditionally, this is what is done as we understand, so as we are taught, so that is part of what it is. Again, traditionally, it's an addition to the original mitzvot. In addition to that, if that's the rationale, if that's the explanation, one thing that has yet to be explained to us is why Yom Kippur is only one day. Yom Kippur occurs on the 10th day of Tishrei. And so perhaps the rationale is that by the 10th of Tishrei, it's already confirmed that the new moon has occurred, and so there's less of a concern of discerning that. However, that same logic can be applied to Shavuot as well, because Shavuot occurs on the 5th, 6th day. Get the months Sivan, but it doesn't occur on the new moon, and so it should be discerned by that point when the new moon is, so that it's only necessary to do Shavuot on one day. So that's some of the rationale. And again, this is nothing new. Kinfolk know this for thousands of years already. So for those that have that interest of asking us why this and the other, we don't mean to be an abrogation. We don't mean to be a disruption. But we have work in this world to do when we're away from the garden. And the second day is a considerable challenge, particularly when you're talking about just this past week. Sukkot is on Thursday. The second day is Friday. Then there's Shabbat. That's 3 days of not interacting. We're not on the internet. We don't have phone. And additionally, to get food, and additionally to secure resources, to connect with kinfolk and be in relationship with the beings around us, there's a requirement of being out and doing work. So that's one thing. One other thing on that note, if kinfolk see me walking with a backpack, that's comparatively simple. We understand there's, particularly during Shabbat, we understand there's rulings concerning carrying items and what constitutes work and what is not work. Where our knowledge about that, my personal knowledge about that, is comparatively modest. I generally recall something of a weight thing being about like 5 pounds or something like that, but obviously those details are absent from Torah to our knowledge, and we're willing to have a discussion about that. However, again, any discussion we have in terms of religious practice at this point, we have to talk about citizenship, because we're less inclined towards being taught by kinfolk who are citizens, because there's too much particularly at this point. There's too much suspicion. There's too much lack of credibility on the part of citizens to perceive things just as in terms of genuine and benevolent. So we need to have that conversation about citizenship before being willing to listen and avail ourselves towards formal learning or thorough learning from others concerning religious practice, because it's too easily construed as manipulation and misguided intentionality. So with that being said, shall we get into the item of consideration for today after half an hour? um, incident. So this occurs. Yes, this occurs immediately following the first day of Sukkot. So this was Thursday evening. Um, observing Sukkot through the day, and then have the occasion of having a meal. And having the meal, um, go to the corner store here as a last minute kind of thing to get some orange juice. And in getting the orange juice, um, have to deliberate, but rather than making this long story long, just say got the orange juice. Go to the counter. There's a queue. The brother says, "Oh, there's another cashier who can ring out." So I go to the cistern who's behind the counter, uh, ring up the orange juice, and then I go to pay with the gift card that I have. There's a delay, and immediately the cistern starts to give me orders about how to utilize the machine, and she's rather curt, and just like talking to a upset mother talking to a child, just like don't do that, do that. Ooh. And she's repetitive in giving me commands, and so upon that, the thing didn't read or whatever, but I just stopped and I'm like, hold up, and there's a plastic partition protocol. So I step aside from the plastic partition to talk to her directly and say, "Yo, like I'm an elder, like I'm an OG, like we don't we got to be careful about these commands and just like barking orders. We need it's beneficial for us to talk with some respect. So let's calm down those commands." And she looked at me with like a blank look, like how dare I talk to her like an equal? But she doesn't say anything. And the machine isn't still not working or whatever. At that point, it just became like a uh, the situation somewhat devolves from that point. And so um, I invite her to utilize the machine to complete the transaction or whatever with the device, and um, she gives me another order, and I say, "Oh no," and then she says, "Oh, we don't take that card." So then I say, okay, that's news to me because I was there just a few days ago and the store takes the card. So I say, just as a matter of fact, since when? Um, and she said, we never take this card. And I'm like, oh, okay, now this is like complete falsehood. So that's fine. It's not a big deal. It's orange juice. Don't need it. Um, but at this point now, we're dealing with two things. One, a direct falsehood. I know it's a lie. I should be careful. Um, it's very confident it's a lie because, well, and that's the reason why I asked. Like, since when? Since when was this policy instituted? Because he used a gift card just a few days ago, and then we've never taken it. Whoa. That's different from personal experience. So then the other brother, she refers to the other brother to help intercede in the situation, and he said, "Oh no, we've never taken these cards." And I communicate to him that yeah, that's not true. And so he looks surprised and astonished and smiles like how I have the audacity to I say that's a lie actually. And so he smiles and says I have the I have the audacity to accuse him of telling a lie. And then so he says, well, I'll call our manager. And so he gets on the phone and feigns, maybe calls somebody, maybe doesn't. It's less consequential. The concern is how kinfolk are talking. Just again, very disrespectful. Like again, like children, almost to the point of dogs. People talk to dogs nicer than people were talking to me at that point. But when it's speaking in an admonishing way, people tend to talk to dogs a little bit worse than the people were talking to me at that moment. But it's along those lines. It's like admonishing a child, a lesser being. So, and children are not lesser beings, but adults tend to perceive kinfolk in such a way. That's how the kinfolk are talking to me. And at that point, the situation, we're not buying that at this moment. Now we're dealing with how we're talking with me, and just the disrespect. So the brethren's like, yeah. He gets on the phone. He's like, yeah. Just talk to my manager. Yeah, we don't take those cards. And so I say, oh, when and again it becomes further. There's further like commands being issued to me. Just go, da 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 da, or this, that, and the other. And with that, The concern is, again, like how the kinfolk are talking to people. And it's understood that the kinfolk are working at a corner store, have to be on the clock in late hours, and so have to deal with all different kind of kinsfolk. There's nothing, how do I say, 99.99% of the products in that corner store are extremely unhealthy. Liquor, alcohol, wine, beer, snack food, junk food, candy, processed drinks and beverages, ice cream, candy bars, snack food. It's all unhealthy. And kinfolk go to the corner store for their fix. And so kinfolk go that to the corner store with all different types of mindsets. Many are drunk, many are thuggish, many are disrespectful to the clerks, all different types of kinfolk. So to deal with that, kinfolk have to be on guard continually. That's understood. However, at the same time, there is the necessity of recognizing some semblance of legitimacy within the kinfolk that we're interacting with. So just to talk to people in this dehumanizing, disrespectful way, it's not healthy for the kinfolk, and it's not healthy for us to allow kinfolk to talk like that, to get accustomed to that, because that's what happens. People just get accustomed to being talked to like that, and people think it's okay and keep on doing it. So it's like, no, no, not today. So what I do, instead of becoming further belligerent, because that just feeds the ignorance. That just feeds the discouragement and the fear to talk in that way. So I start to sing the Gayatri Mantra, Om Bhuvas Fahad, because I know the kinfolk are of Indian. I hear the kinfolk speaking most likely in Hindi, just a few moments before that. So that's the presumption of the kinfolk being Hindu rather than Muslim, which can be a very difficult thing to discern. But because of that, I'm going on a limb and I start singing the Gayatri Mantra as a way of like heightening the consciousness at that moment. That's something that most kinfolk have a familiarity with, at the very least, to have some pause and say, "Oh, let me slow up. How much I'm like getting at folk at this moment." And so I just start reciting the Gayatri Mantra. Om Bhur Bhuvasvahat Tat Savatu Vareneyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yo Na Prachodayat. However, rather than calming the situation, at least at that moment, that seems to further agitate the situation, because the sister, and she was sort of short circuiting at that moment. And that's something that's experienced before, that when somebody is in a mode, in a zone of just like warrior, of just like trying to annihilate or conquer whatever's in front of somebody, and then confronted with something that's holy, it calls into question that precipitating guidance to be the warrior, and that can be further aggravating and just further frenzied, not necessarily um, berserk, because it's a different phenomena, but frenzied, um, and further agitated and aggressive. So that's the case on this particular day a couple of days ago. Um, at the corner store, when I start singing the Gayatri Mantra, the sister in short circuit, it's difficult for her to talk to me at this point at all. It was difficult for her when she referred to the brethren, but at that point she just couldn't even be in the same. She walked away, but the brethren was still in the space, and he becomes agitated, walking back and forth, and he's like, yeah. And I was like, so after I finish a full recitation, at least one full recitation of the Gayatri Mantra, I say, do you know what that is? He's like, yeah. And I was like, can you tell me what that is? Just so I know that he knows what it is, and he's not just BSing me again. He's like, and as he says it, Gayatri Mantra, I say it with him to let him know that I know what it is, just to confirm, even if he has any doubt, that, I mean, me singing it should be evidence enough, but we say it together. So now I know he knows what it is. And for him to know what it is and to say it means that most likely he is Hindu. If he was Muslim, he would not say Gayatri Mantra. He's like, I don't know what that is. I don't care what that is, da 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 da. And he would express this like, I'm a Muslim or something like that. So for him to say it's the Gayatri Mantra, that's an affirmation of what his spiritual path is and what his literacy is, and what he should be able to see from me in communicating that to him. But instead of like slowing up, he doubles down further and he says, yeah, I read that shit every day. Wow. obviously it's a very conflicted statement because he calls it shit. Holy, sacred, ancient mantra. He calls it shit. Um, but at the same time, he's acknowledging it and affirming it and says that he reads it every day. It's not a matter of like, yeah, I learned that a long time ago. He says every day. He says, I read that every day. I read that shit every day. So it shows again, he's in that mode where he has to talk and think in this derogatory way, even about himself and the things that he holds sacred. He has to use that language, that demonstrative, masculine, um, talk down to language, even about the things, not even about himself, but the things that he reveres, presumably, if he's reading it every day, if we're going to take him at his word for that. So he's affirming it, but at the same time, he's debasing it and shows the conflict that he's in. And I see that at that moment, and I'm trying to think of how to deal with that at the moment. At the same time, fend off what he's doing to our side. So then, shortly thereafter, um, I ask him. In the whole process, he's not trying to talk at all. He's going back and forth. He's fidgeting now. He's threatening calling the police. I invite him to call the police. Call the police. I mention something to the effect of, when he calls the police will be escorting him out. And at that point, we're talking about karma. We're talking about spirit. We're talking about an authority beyond the government, the earthly government, and additionally. So that's the level we're on at that moment. And he's going back and forth. He's on the phone, da 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 da. And at some point, he tries to, like, he keeps saying, yeah, just get out, get out, get out. But no, we have to deal with this thing at the moment. And I'm not going behind the counter. I'm not making threats. I'm trying to engage, much like when the police was hitting me with the batons 20 some odd years ago. I'm not trying to fight back. I'm blocking what's being done to me. So I'm not agitating. I'm not aggressive. I'm not assaulting. In the corner store, I'm standing behind the counter and I'm reciting mantra and I'm endeavoring to engage in conversation. I'm just like, yo, you gotta have to talk with people with respect, like for your own sake, for your own sake. Um, and I try to do that in speaking one's language, and when one is speaking disrespectfully about one's own spiritual language, wow. So at that point, I ask a question. And it gets a little bit like tenacious, which is one of the reasons why I'm articulating this to further like explain this. What I'm sitting here a minute ago, just thinking about an hour ago at this point, nearly. Um, so then I ask him, is he a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or a Vaisya or a Shudra? Because it's not a matter of trying to like demote him or box him or anything, but he's identified himself as a Hindu by recognizing the Gayatri Mantra and referring to it, referring to studying and reading it on a regular basis. So he has literacy, he has affiliation, he has lineage, and now my purpose and my responsibility is to discern what his lineage is, to discern what his responsibility is. If he's a Brahmin, then he has a very sacred, necessary responsibility to speak with me in a spiritual way. If he's a Kshatriya, then that's a different responsibility. He has the responsibility of being the enforcer, the governor, the prince, the warrior. If he's a Vaisya, that's his responsibility. So I'm working to discern from him what his responsibilities are in this conversation. Because if he's a Shudra or if he's a Vaisya, then he has less of a responsibility. I can walk out the door and not have to like explain to him or share with him other lessons or whatever else. Let that speak for itself. If it's a Kshatriya, then there's certain responsibilities, and we have to communicate on that level. And if he's a Brahmin, then there's that. Now, most likely, he's other than a Brahmin or a Kshatriya. Perhaps that's being presumptuous, and it's appropriate not to be too presumptuous. So I ask him, are you a Brahmin, a Kshatriya, a Vaisya, or a Shudra? He doesn't respond. And again, I can see that just me having that literacy and asking him that question is further agitating and aggravating, because he's already in that mode of devaluing me and dehumanizing me. And for me to do anything outside of that zone that he's trying to fix, is further agitating because it doesn't just apply to that moment. It applies to everything he's doing in that position, in that store, and perhaps being here in this country. And that's not a dig, that's not anti-immigration or whatever, but those are the implications, because what he's doing at that moment is founded upon some of the very basic things that people are taught and conditioned to be in this country, in terms of talking to people and otherwise. So he doesn't respond to that, and so I say, "You're a Dalit." Now that was a little bit me on my part, snarky. I won't say snarky. It was a little bit maybe lack of patience, frustration. Maybe it was somewhat of an intention of provoking from him some kind of response. Might be perceived as not the most constructive thing to articulate. However, it's actually extremely necessary and appropriate for me to make that articulation. Because when he does not voluntarily identify himself one way or the other, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaisya, or Shudra, there's few other options in that respect left. And in actuality, literally, when he's not identifying as that, he is a Dalit. He is an untouchable. He is an outcast, because he has not proclaimed himself as any one of those castes. Not only that, he's communicated a knowledge about the Gayatri Mantra, a knowledge about the teachings that come from the Vedas, the Upanishads, and additionally, and he has referred to it literally as shit, Dalit. That is what it is, and that's not accusatory. That's not intended as being derogative. That's derogatory. That's the actuality, and particularly to help him awaken from where he is at that moment when he's selling those toxins, when he's selling that pollution, those poisons to kinfolk. What he's doing when he's talking disrespectfully and dismissively, derogatorily to kinfolk, dehumanizingly to kinfolk. That is what he is doing. That is what he is. A Dalit. Game recognized game. It takes one to know one. Ugh. I'm saying ugh to myself. But that's what it is, and that's what I am addressing when I refer to him in that way. Yes, there might be some of my ego in trying to like return some of that negative dehumanization back at him, but what allows me to do it and continue doing and not apologize for it afterwards is the actuality. So when we recognize that, okay, this is going to be a situation here, it's a very extremely minor. But again, amidst the conditions, like, we've got to do this, and my eyes are starting to hurt now, seriously. So I sit down. There's a box of a stack of boxes or whatever right there by the aisle. So I just sit on the boxes, and I just, okay, you're gonna call police? Go at it. They keep threatening. They ask me to just be. And at that point, I just start. The music is playing. At first, I was just sitting quietly, but then they got the music blasting, and the music is all negative stuff. And so I go into my mode instead of doing the this chant of the Welt Ethos, Sole Dare to Be, the 16 principles. I continue singing the Gayatri Mantra because that's what's needed at that moment. And as recognition, I want to get into a little bit further of the read in this one and then wrap this up, God willing. So I continue singing the Gayatri Mantra, and I'm singing it commensurate with the volume of the music. They ask me to be quiet. They ask me to tone it down, and just they try to like reason with me. And by that point, like, both are periodically walking back and forth from behind the counter to the aisle where I'm sitting right in front of the counter, and then back behind the counter, and then other places. Each one takes a turn, and each one tries to like reason with me at that point and say, well, could you just quiet it down a little bit and this, and then try to take a nicer tone. And I'm not talking to the sister at that point, because that's the man is here. We're talking with the man at this point. So there's less to talk with the sister. So and she kind of stares at me, and what we can talk about that situation as well. The whole me thinks she doth protest too much kind of situation, and all my ego, whatever. That's another story. When he walks by on a few occasions, and he asks me what my shirt says, and he tries to like engage conversation. By that point, there's estimation that the police have already been called, so fine. And there's trying to like maybe it was that nice cop, bad cop kind of thing that he was trying to flex at that point. It's an interesting scenario because at one point he's beside himself and he can't like talk straight or civilly, and then he after a few moments walking by, he's trying to engage in conversation. So I say, "Are we ready to talk respectfully with each other?" He's like, "No, that's okay." Okay. Um, they talk about concerns about the other customers being bothered, this, that, and the other. Oh, now you care about customers. Um, and then like saying quiet things to some of the customers in a joking way or whatever. Um, we can imagine what was communicated in that respect. But only doing that with the customers who are of European ancestry, otherwise not talking too much with the customers who are of African ancestry. And we're not trying to play a race card here because black folk be like say, "Oh, you want to be down with the black folk now?" This is what we do. So this is just what it is. So we're not trying to like all of a sudden be like some black solidarity thing because we're still dealing with the black mixed situation too. So we're not trying to feign any kind of thing. At one point, there's an auntie there. She said, "Yo, they're gonna call the police," and I was like, "That's fine. There's a greater authority." And so that sense that fear of death and everything else that comes with just conjuring the police and threatening the police, we're part of our purpose at that point is letting kinfolk know that there are conditions that are beyond this. So eventually the police arrive, and when the police arrive, they talk with the kinfolk at the counter first, then the two officers who approach me, brethren, probably a little bit younger than myself, actually, to be honest, probably in the 30s and 40s, which is, I guess, considerably younger than myself. One of them already recognizes me and says, "It's nice to see me again." The other one calls me boss. I'm like, "Ooh, wow, okay. We have to be mindful here." So I basically just communicate the spiel. I say I'm a man of God. I'm a man of the law. If you know me, the brother's like, "Yeah, I know who you are." I'm like, "Okay, then you know that I'm about peace thoroughly for a long time." And I said, "Kinfolk here," I refer to the kinfolk as green plants. The kinfolk are young, very young to be having that type of hateful, um, antagonistic mentality. And I said, the kinfolk are green plants. And that's basically what I said. They're young to be talking to kinfolk like that. It's basic respect. And I know they're dealing with all types of things here, but they got to know how to deal with things. And it's beneficial for you to tell them that. And I can leave at any moment. That's fine. But they need to know how to speak with people. And the police are just like, "Okay, appreciate that." Um, and with that, I say, "Okay, I can bounce," and I proceed out. So that's the situation. Now with the cistern, I'll say two things. One, as it is the case with man and woman, primordial. I recognize the cistern from before, and there are the circumstances that I'm not going to articulate at the moment because one, it's rather speculative, and two, it's somewhat less consequential, although it may be evolved. But I recognize her from before, and if she may be a sister that I recognize from before, she may be a different sister, to be honest. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but I'm just being honest. If she's the sister before, I've seen her on numerous occasions before that at the store and outside of the store, and there's even been congenial interaction. If she's the same sister I'm thinking about, if not, that's fine. Either way, um, I've seen her before. This particular sister, specifically at the store, in recent occasions. So it's not the first time I see her. Now that being said, one thing that's aware of is that sisters do things in like multi layers for multi reasons, for better and for worse, and at any point can just attribute it to one or the other rationale or one or the other side. She can do something. She can point. She can like poke a dude, um, and on one hand, the dude be like, "Yo, what you poking me for?" And she's like, "Yo, get out my way. You in my way. Get out the way." And it can be very antagonistic and vitriolic and everything else like that. And at the same time, she can poke the dude and like, "Yo, what you poking me for?" And she just smiles. Oh, okay. So that's woman. So even when something is seemingly antagonistic, many times that's how she knows how to communicate and get a man's attention and show her affection and interest. And additionally, now that's extremely presumptuous. That can be perceived as extremely egotistical. This is facts. This is life, and it's about how a man responds accordingly. but particularly recognizing that they say in show business, any attention is good attention, any publicity is good publicity. That tends to be the situation with women. Any attention is positive attention, and so women does things to get attention. Um, and so the whole notion of the commands and the provocative disrespect, the repetitive dismissiveness. On one hand, it can be like, no, she just plain old racist and she don't like this, that, and the other, and she not trying to deal with that. And at the same time, it can be like, no, but she love and she want to be down and da 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 da. Um, and it can be a complete something 180, and I'll give another 180 scenario. So for one, just between myself and her, um, again, um, that static can be can be aphrodisiac. The static is aphrodisiac. How about that? So that's one factor, and it exactly is that at that moment. That is exactly that. She's a man. Well, how about that? She's a woman. I'm a man, and there's that primordial interaction. So when there's attention and interaction, she has her seed, I have my seed. That little blah blah blah, like bears, that little bump or whatever else can easily in a moment turn into copulation and conception of a child. That's primordial. Now obviously there are other factors involved in addition, um, because in a social sense, in a civilizational sense, she's vying to ascend within the hierarchy, and so she has to plot and figure out her way to optimize that ascendancy, and that could be by dehumanizing kinfolk such as myself. That could be just being in blinders mode and just treating certain peoples in certain types of ways, and otherwise picking and choosing her opportunities for um, acute um, aggressions and otherwise. So that's another rationale, and that's exactly what it is at that moment. Amidst the first rationale that I described, it's the same thing. It's all applicable. And here's the third scenario, a third rationale. She knows the young brethren there. She does love the brethren right there, and she sees that that brethren is conflicted. He is still on that verge. He hasn't totally turned. He's wrestling right there at that moment, and she knows that, and she knows something about myself and helping in a spiritual path, in a spiritual way, of him dealing with what he's dealing with, because he's leveraged. He's in another place. He's in another land where he's not born. He's in the pocket of other people for his own livelihood, perhaps for the livelihood of other kinfolk that he has some type of responsibility for. So he's got things he's answering to others, and at the same and those others are guiding him in a way that is different than who he is and what he knows to be. And he's extremely conflicted by that because it's difficult for him to find another way, a better way of doing things. And so he is increasingly resigned towards toting the line that is put in front of him by the other kinfolk of, this is how it is in this country, this is how you got to be, turn yourself off and just do this. So he's still wrestling with that because he still has that semblance of relatability when he recognizes the Gayatri Mantra, when he has that ability to communicate in a congenial way, even in a brief thing. After it, there's that semblance of redemption and Satnam and otherwise. So, and she knows that. She knows he's wrestling right there. She knows what he's dealing with, the kind of forces that are around him and over him. And so she sees this window of, oh, here it is. Talk to this dude. He needs it right now. Talk to him quietly but loudly. He needs it right now. So women work in miraculous ways, and all of those three scenarios and even further are applicable to her actions and her and I interaction. Um, I'll say two things. One thing, and I'll wrap this up. One thing is that as I was reciting the Gayatri Mantra, there was a period there, there was a point there where she was standing behind the counter at a register and kind of just looking at me, like just staring at me. And at one point, with her just staring at me, to be honest, I was on the verge of like blowing her a kiss because she was just staring at me so hard. Um, and that's what it was like. However, I was working diligently to be disciplined, and it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't that. It was like an instantaneous kind of thing. But because I'm reciting the Gayatri Mantra, I can just focus on just articulating that rather than responding to her provocation with further provocation. So, or even like reversing 180 provocation. So I'm able to fend off that instinct of blowing her a kiss by just continuing to do the Gayatri Mantra. Um, so that's one thing. The other thing is that, to be honest, I think it was maybe a couple months ago. If she's the same sister that I remember from before, there was an occasion when something didn't go through, and on that particular occasion, um, I was something happened about me like getting a bag of chips and maybe some juice or something like that at that time. And I remember like something happened where the transaction didn't go through again. This was months ago, um, and I left, and it might have been like there was insufficient balance or something like that. That's fine. That's on me. Sometimes that's what it is. So because of that, didn't do the purchase. I've done purchases numerous times since then, um, but months ago that was the case, and I remember like, yo, I didn't need that stuff, and it was like being thankful that it didn't go through, and there was something else to the fact of like I could have done it if if it was enough of a motivation, but it was like her something was being communicated from her like, you don't need this, you don't want this, this is not healthy, don't do this. Like, as a matter of fact, don't come here because there's nothing healthy here. Like her, there's that vibration coming from her, and particularly the fact that the transaction to go through is like, all right, that's thankful. All right, continue on. So that was a few months ago, if I recall that correctly. If it was the same sister, and I know that happened, but if it's the same sister. So, anyways, that's some of the things. So all of that factors into all of that. Um, Men tend to be comparatively one-sided, or rather minimal-sided in terms of recognizing the different facets of what's going on. We have to be. That's our nature. Women tend to have a further ready awareness of multiple facets of all the different intricacies and all the different exactly contradictory lines and pathways in a particular scenario, as I mentioned before in the communication. And much of man's role in these conditions is to make decisions about how to proceed within which path. Um, and it's not a matter about blaming anybody or faulting anybody. It's just a matter of understanding at that moment what is the path of optimal well-being for each kinfolk here. Ultimately, it all progresses into the same destination, heaven, nirvana. This is where we're all going. Um, and in the meanwhile, it's just the pathways there, and our experience of dukkha, suffering, and our experience of sukha, satcha, happiness, within that path. Such is the season of this moment of Sukha, the booth, and Diwali, the festival of light. And with that being said, we give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Respect, gratitude, and honor to His Majesty Haile Selassie and Her Majesty Wazir who share the examples of sovereignty, diplomacy, patience, deliberation, standing for what is right without getting mad, without getting indignant, without losing dignity, Standing for what is right whilst maintaining dignity. Being thoroughly disrespected, dehumanized, dismissed, derogatorily spoken to, lies and slander said about, and being matter of fact. Responding with truth, with diligence, with patience, with balance, with authority and responsibility for millions of lives, family, kinfolk, country, knowing the weight and the repercussions of every act and every word. And having faith in God, in the Most High, in Elohim, in Allah, in Brahman. Having faith in the ultimate oneness. And in understanding and attunement with purpose in this life. Respect for all life, regardless of what the status is. And endeavoring to share with each life the knowledge, the learning, the wisdom of how to walk within this life. And the tools and the nutrition, the substance to walk in this life. We give thanks and praise to the Most High. There are challenges within the day, within these days. Governments are paper puppets at this moment. I talked before about the demon and devil and things like that being manifest. And it's interesting because I'm not raised in that type of vernacular of just talking with that type of language. But that's very much what this is. I'm seeing the second bus pass by. It must be over an hour now, indeed. But that's where things are. I try to think about like what I'm saying now, how that sounds to somebody who's in the mainstream society, mainstream culture at this moment. I think of myself as I grow up just watching TV, just the standard thing, what everybody else sees and stuff like that. And that's my literacy. And I think of how my words now, when talking about devil and what the world is and this and the other, how that would sound, how that would appear to myself at that age when I just know about mainstream culture. It might sound interesting. I would probably, before making decisions and judgment, I'll probably like want to learn further about who this person is, what they do, to discern like what to make of that person. If I had the availability to find that information easily, comparatively, didn't have internet and stuff like that before in those days. So that's one thing. Obviously, it's often about how things are framed, how things are presented, that influences people's first impressions. I'm not one to be too taken by first impressions, to be honest, and let things kind of like show themselves eventually. So that's how I probably receive what I'm saying at this moment, back in those days when I'm that young. And I'm talking about from elementary school all the way through high school. When I get through high school, particularly when I get further popular, that's probably when I get a little bit further ignorant and less mindful. That's when I start listening to like the stuff that everybody else is listening to. And that's not blaming anybody, just recognizing like that mentality. And it takes a little bit further for me to like find my zone. Still working on that and doing it. Point for this is this. That would be me in mainstream culture, my experience of mainstream, ordinary, normal society 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. That's a long time ago now. I think about it. I don't feel that way, but that's the way it is. Um, and what is difficult for me at this moment is to discern what is mainstream culture now. What is, like, people don't watch TV today. TV was very limited in showing things. Everybody was watching the same thing. Many people were disgruntled about that, but everybody's watching the same thing. I'm uncertain what mainstream culture is today. It's difficult to discern what everybody is watching, what everybody knows, um, what the shared references are, what the shared, like, if there were certain things in the 80s and 90s into the 2000s even, where regardless if somebody was white or black or any other race, people generally knew this, people generally knew that. People generally saw this, people generally heard about that, people generally knew that. It's difficult to say what people generally know today. Even, like, to be honest, even like the president, or let alone governors, senators, any of that. I don't know that. I don't know who the governor is. I could guess. I don't know who the senators are. In Ohio, I don't know the name of the mayor of Cleveland. I could guess. I don't know the mayor of Cleveland Heights, per se. Um, so what's the frame of reference? What's mainstream culture? What is something that everybody experiences? So that when somebody who's talking about, like, demon angels and this, that, and the other, how somebody like that is perceived. Maybe it's comparatively less significant or less relevant to discern, or for there to be a mainstream culture. Maybe that's how things are evolving. That's one of the things we communicate. This decentralization of the macro, and the omni, so that there's a functionality amidst all the differentiation. Um, the sirens are sounding now because that involves um, challenging the infrastructure, the hierarchies that have a hegemony on the power structures, police, military, policies, behavior, laws within the micro, the micro. Um, so for there to be an absence of a uniform mainstream culture, uh, connotes a rather difficult, precarious endeavor of trying to control multitudes of cultures, even just within this land, this continent. That does make sense. I'm uncertain how many people, and I don't mean to sound like condescending or whatever, but it's difficult to discern how many people follow that per se. And that's an onus on me of being able to articulate it further, coherently, simply. Perhaps it's coherent, but simply. Um, Point with that is going back to the notion of the demons and the demonic, as I said before, like the howls, they quieted down after a while. The sun is approaching too. It's starting to get lighter a little bit, so we can see Fajr. 6:50 is the hour at this moment. 6:51. So Fajr is probably about now, actually. The day rise is probably about an hour and a half, and I have yet to learn what the mathematics are between when Fajr begins and when the day rise is. It seems to be about an hour and a half thereabouts, but it seems to also vary. And there's a whole conversation about Fajr in the northern Sweden at midwinter, and additionally so. Anyway, all right. We go back to the difference of the Sunnah and the Quran. The Sunnah. How is it? How is the Sunnah obligatory when the Sunnah is unattainable? Specifically referring to the number of wives that are traditionally recognized as being allowed within Islam. The Sunnah states a certain number. However, the interpretation of the Quran teaches a different number. So there's a different standard, and within the different standard, how can one who is a Muslim be expected to follow the Sunnah, whilst at the same time being told that the Sunnah is unattainable? It smacks of a um, an intrinsic methodology of subordination within that gap, and that's not an admonishment or a dig. That's genuine striving beyond the authority of man, um, and the authoritarianism of man. So going back to the demonic and the diva, as I was saying, the devil. Um, People on the streets, and additionally, can like lambast the police, as we've talked about before, um, and it is what it is. We're not we're on record about where we stand with police, and additionally, but what was necessary was beneficial for the streets to recognize, for the hood, for black folk, white folk, all around, is to recognize like a phenomenon that is malevolent, that is that causes harm, and that confronts each being, and how that manifests itself, and how certain people, including police, are called upon to protect against and minimize that phenomenon. Now, obviously, as we said before, there are abuses. The law itself is an abrogation of truth. So the police who are called upon to enforce the law are inhibited and even obligated in the abrogation of truth. However, at the same time, the police are also called upon to protect well-being. So there's a variation in terms of how much each one adheres to that duality, and to the priority protocol of well-being. The point here is that the police encounter demons on a regular basis of different natures, of different ways. We're hearing the birds now, so that's nice. That sounds like the robins. Maybe doing some early hunting. Ain't much insects, I think, at the moment. Maybe there's still some worms around. There are a few insects, maybe some beetles or something. It's been warm too in recent days. That does sound like the robin, though. The initial clickety clack of the robins as the robins start to communicate with each other and go hunting in groups, at least 2 by 2. So the police deal with the demons on a regular basis, a different kind. And just to give you an idea, as I said before, what demons are, we're supposed to wrap this up already, but just to give you an idea about the demons. Like when you see somebody who's drunk, if you go to a club and you see somebody just blah, and they're outside of themselves, that's an example of that. When police go to a domestic abuse house, and the husband is drunk, he's just mad at the wife, and the wife is just out of her mind yelling at the husband. She's dead sober, but she's just furious and just wailing. There's demon in that, and that's not to dehumanize the man or the woman, but just to understand that these are forces. This is the kinfolk are being, I say, possessed is a very like played out, like charged trope, but it's along those lines. Put it like this. Here's one way to put two things. People are not themselves. People are under the influence. That's one way of describing it. People are under the influence. We can call it under the influence of alcohol, and additionally, but we can also understand that's under the influence of the spirits. For better and for worse, they can get very confident and intelligent and da 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 for a time. They're under the influence. Oh, that's that drunk courage. Then they can get mad and angry and hateful. They're under the influence. They can get depressed and quiet and under the influence. And it doesn't require alcohol, it doesn't require herb, it doesn't require any drug, heroin, or anything else to be under the influence. There are all different types of ways of being under the influence. Going to Legacy Village and going on a shopping spree and buying designer this and label that, under the influence. Feeling that high. Oh, let's go get some wine now, under the influence. Dressing up sexy. Looking for women dressed up sexy, under the influence. There are all different types of ways of being under that influence. And under that influence is being guided and manipulated by that otherly phenomenon. We can call it demon, we can call it devil, we can call it temptation, we can call it greed, hatred, delusion, all of that. So each of us is under the influence, one way or the other. To be in this life, we are under the influence. And the consideration is, how much of ourselves are we? Are we at 90%? I'm 90%. I am 90% me. I'm sober. I'm on point. I'm doing my work. I'm supposed to be doing what I'm doing. I'm fully aware of who I am, what I'm doing, who I'm with, what it is. 90%. Maybe it's at 50%. I don't know, y'all. I'm tired. I'm dealing with some things right now. We're at 50%. We may be at 40% or whatever else. But it's a matter of being mindful of like who we are. What is that? What is that 40%? What is that 90%? Who am I? What am I doing in this life? What am I about? When did I become me? At what point am I me? We are each a continual process of growth and change. And additionally, so at what point are we? We can talk about being born. That's who we are. We can talk about like our first memories. That's who we are. We can talk about puberty. That's who we are. The first time of having sexual intercourse. That's who we are. Talk about being married. That's who we are. Talk about graduation. That's who we are. Talk about first job. That's who we are. Whatever it is that we think we are, how do we discern that, and what is that? And then when we do have some idea of what that is, how much of that are we at this moment when we're faced with a temptation? Yo, you got this opportunity, but we want you to do this. But I'm not. That's not about me. That's not what I'm about. That ain't me. No, but it's okay. But you can do this and think of all the things you can do with this: money, job, influence. But we just want you to do this too. So in accepting that, you might go from 80% to 60%. But in that 60%, you can do some things. Is it worth it? We each have to do this. We each have our variables and progression within life. The point here is that however we define ourselves of who we are and how much we give up of ourselves in order to be in this life, to get money, to get food, to get shelter, whatever, to get a woman, how much of ourselves we give up. What is that absence? What is that other percentage? If we are 60% ourselves, what is that other 40%? Who got that 40%? How does that 40% change who we are and what we do, how we're seen, how we are loved, how we're known? Significant. And if somebody's drunk off the hizzy or whatever, yo, they can go from 80% to 5%. A 5%er right there. At that moment, they're 5% themselves. If you call them by name, they might recognize that. They're at 5%. That 95%, that's something else. You can see it. You can see it right there. 95%, something else. Greed, hatred, delusion, temptation, Mara, Shaitan, devil, demon, angels, God, something else. That's very visible. When somebody's shopping, designer, where are they at on their percentages? Point is to recognize that we are each operating under 100%. Necessarily just to be in this life, we are underneath 100%. Whatever whoever we are, we're underneath 100%. And the consideration is what level, what percentage are we at, and then what is that other percentage? Because I articulate percentages where that complementary, that other side percent is something else, demon da 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 da. But as I said also, that other percent could be also Elohim, can be truth, emet, beyond ourselves, beyond our wants, beyond our personality, beyond anything we want to be in this life. We've given that up. So we can walk these roads of creation at 40%. And the other 40% can be purely God. We're living for God. We're living for truth. We've given up ourselves. No, I don't need that. No, I don't need that. No, I don't need that. No, I don't want that. No, that's okay. You can keep it to yourself. We're 40% ourselves. 40% if we define ourselves about like how we grew up and who we know in our youth and before, whilst we're still virgins and like just like who we are is not a finite thing at any point in time. But if we perceive that in some way, like who our essence is, then we find this spiritual path, and then we give a lot of that up of who we are beforehand. We give up a lot of those pleasantries, the pleasantness of those luxuries, even the comforts of who we are before, so that we're only 40% of what we are at that time. But the other 40% of that is devoting it to God, so that we're studying scriptures beyond what we're taught when we are ourselves. We are sharing and teaching and giving and being of the earth in an empathic, altruistic way, beyond ourselves, beyond getting paid for it, beyond salary, beyond recognition. We're not saying our name, no credit on this earthly realm. That other 40% is for God, is for truth, is for love. We give up 40% of ourselves for the experience of love. Now that other 20% that's in the remainder, if we're 40% ourselves and 40% of it is devoted to God and for the purpose of God, we got 20%. Oh, that's still that devil, that's still that temptation. And additionally, that continues throughout life, and that we fall into with our judgmentalism, or through our certain indulgences. Oh, I still want to do this, or I still want to do that, or even taking advantage when we said we wouldn't take advantage. Ooh-dee. Still that. So there's that 20%, and that can vary. We can be 40% ourselves, 60% to God at one moment, and then another moment it can vary. So anyways, point is to be mindful of this and recognize that everybody else is doing this as well. Everybody's in it as well. And what we are observing, and as I talk about the police in it, what the police encounter, and additionally, is that many people are operating at lesser and lesser percentages of themselves. And further, people are attached to these joints, can't even maintain concentration. I'm doing it right now. I feel so sober and healthy when being off of this, being off of devices. But at the same time, like, this is a methodology of communication. So we understand. We have to work on even just the literacy about the internet. However, at this moment, but there's an awareness that, again, watching people drive and being on devices, people are operating at lesser degrees of themselves. And in addition to that, people are being further aggressive and antagonistic, can't speak to each other civilly, respectfully, and even just going to a store. Such difficulties for doing that. So that there's the further agitations that have um, susceptibility of combustion, and that's macro. That's macro, micro. It's at the micro level, macroly, and that is beyond the manageability of police. It's beyond the manageability of governments. Governments have been penetrated. Governments are porous. And so when looking for solutions, the governments are further obstructive than constructive. Governments are doing further harm than benefit. And it's difficult to see governments changing for the better volitionally, voluntarily. And that's not the call for overthrow, because that's replacing one type of poison with another type of poison. It's a matter of understanding like how this plays out, how this unfolds. And what we are observing, as I was supposed to get off half an hour ago, what we are observing is that it's the solution. One of the solutions we sort of articulate is modern naturalism. So modern naturalism is the emphasis of natural being, harmony with nature, returning to nature increasingly, other than necessarily comprehensively exclusively, meaning like just being garden beings across the board, all of civilization, quote unquote civilization. But it is a matter of recognizing that the healing and the well-being of life is in relationship with nature. And this is quasi antithetical to the continually evolving culture of science technology that is increasingly much further digitized, nano, and chemical, and transnatural, or away from nature, and further manipulated, further calculated, and further antagonistic towards nature, and people having independence with nature. But at the same time, there needing to be a balance, because at this point, and continually, science technology, and the most evolved science technology, requires nature and requires natural beings, even simply for peace of mind, and context, perspective, inspiration, sense of purpose, guidance, balance, and further inspiration for solutions, for further calculation, is derived from relationship with nature, genuine, healthy relationship with nature. So the most advanced, evolved science technology continuously needs to make space for healthy, natural life. Governments are significantly compromised in doing it effectively at the moment. And thus, there is guidance, there is suggestion, there's recommendation that those who are inclined are called upon to take initiative to return or establish frontiers of natural ways of being, native kinfolk going to parks and establishing settlements, in disciplined ways, in sustainable ways, with and without official permission and sanction from government authorities, needing to just like the notion of civil disobedience. This is an evolved version of that in terms of being proactive in living a healthy way, because governments are obstructing healthy living, organic agriculture, healthy water, governments are obstructing it, literally, not just polluting it, but obstructing healthy living through pricing, through legislation in terms of making illegal foraging from forests, um, polluting and permitting the pollution of water, preventing people from having access from growing food themselves, from providing or even keeping a space for people to grow things independent from the monetary economic system, and the food that is provided most readily through standard conventional retail outlets um, is extremely processed and synthetic. So uh, there needs to be space for healthy natural living. And so modern naturalism is that civilizational paradigm of returning to an emphasis within nature and utilizing, being very select in utilizing technology, very basic technology for communication and coordination of healthy natural living. Um, so it's not just a matter of just personal volition of picking and choosing technologies. There's certain um, there's a discipline that's required for because the evolved science technology is likely, I say, will continue to have huge militaristic advantage and leverage over other life, and additionally, and so there's always that susceptibility of being um, conquered, of being um, imperialized by the way advanced science technology. So for people just to say, well, I want this science technology, for people to comparatively, personally, autonomously, arbitrarily select, well, I want to do this and I want to do that technology and I want that one and that seems nice. The advanced, evolved science technology is less willing to simply permit that type of arbitrariness, and willing to like make a reserve for people to make those comparatively autonomous, self-involved kind of decisions. Um, there are limits to the evolved science technology, and evolved science technology acknowledges this. However, um, in acknowledging the limits of evolved science technology, it doesn't equate to simply making available all these opportunities for any and all kind of kinfolk to do what they want. So, in making space, when evolved science technology makes space for natural healing and well-being, there are necessary protocols and discipline for people who live, for people who reside, for people who partake of, for people who are invested with that healthy, natural living space. There are protocols, there's a discipline, there are rules. The Panchaseelas is a very strong foundation of that: peace, sharing, chastity, honesty, and sobriety. And it goes beyond, to be honest, it goes beyond just rules. It goes back to what Lao Tzu teaches in Tao Te Ching, which is the further rules there are, the further thieves abound. It's a matter of like, if you just codify everything and say that you have to do this, 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 then people just find ways of getting around that. So it's all about the spirit of the law. It's about like in one's heart committing to that. And how does one know that? By certain basic promises. So, for example, for peace, it means like promising not to use lethal weapons, come what may. That's extremely vulnerable. And when people cultivate a practice for that and are known for that, then there's further trust and saying, okay, we see that this is how you do. So now here's some land. And if you work this land, you live in this land, you be healthy in this land on your own, there are going to be challenges, there are going to be difficulties, there are going to be dangers. You have to deal with that yourself. Now, if something happens from outside, that's significant. You have to do this on yourself and continually. Like, this is something that needs to be sustainable. That you can't just continue to like go back and want this and this and the other, but find a systemic way to continue to be yourself and natural in this environment, and at the same time continue to interact and engage with the rest of the world society in a viable way amidst all the predators that come from world society, finding a way to proficiently fend off that predatoriness. Now, when there's an excessive amount of predatoriness, or when there's an acute amount of predatoriness, there is a responsibility of world society to step and say, hey, no, that's our bad. That's one of ours. We'll get that for you. There is that continuing obligation on the part of world society. But for the most part, the modern naturalist is responsible for providing for oneself, and protecting oneself. And oneself, I'm saying, as a collective being, a collective of beings. And so that requires, again, proven discipline of not just being some satellite overthrowing entity or whatever that's just taking advantage or of being a welfare case of just bleeding off the system, even as the system is just being a leech itself from Earth. But being a leech of a leech does not excuse the situation. So being off that, but genuinely having a genuine relationship with nature, and finding that balance of modernity, of what technology is permissible and prudent, and then disciplines about what technology is not. And we've drawn the line before of the smartphone, of all technology up to the smartphone. So that pertains to transportation, that pertains to buildings and infrastructure, even including passive house construction and other methodologies similar to this. But these basic methodologies of modernity, up to the smartphone. So not having smartphones and drawing the line there. Having laptops can be on the internet communication, basic communication, even video conferencing call, this, that, and the other. But beyond this, there's lack of a need, lack of availability, lack of permissibility. And in that void, those who want to go further in science technology, go back into science and technology realm, into world society, and fend accordingly. But those who reside in those reservations for modern naturalism that is increasingly indigenous, governed by indigenous, this is the limit of the technology advancement. And then you can continue to work and develop and produce the technology up to that point. Mobile phones without smart technology, quote unquote. Even satellite phones, and additionally, and that's pushing it a little bit. So there's a continuity, and what that limitation does is help people focus on what the salient technology is, rather than getting caught up in the hype and trends, and the conspicuous consumption and the designed obsolescence. Being further mindful of decision making when it comes to purchasing and investing within technology, and in that modesty, knowing that it's not going to overtake science technology. It's not going to take the most advanced weaponry. It's not going to overtake the most advanced communications and circuitry and everything else like that. And so it's a matter of focusing on what the needs are of that modern naturalist, and continuing to build life generation after generation, door for door, accordingly. So anyways, that's what we share. We're getting to day rise now, so we're going to wrap this up. And again, we say all thanks and praise. We give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim, and blessed love and peace and Rastafari.